Alright, well, YouTube, this is part 2 for the wide body kit. You'll see we've got the fender pulled off. One thing I forgot to mention in the first video, before you ever make a cut, make sure that you have clearance back behind. I did know he was up here and I went ahead and cut him anyways. You can see I got a little bit scrapey with him, but we were able to do it without actually punking a hole in it, which is good. But be aware of that. Also, there is a plastic inner fender liner. You can see I've already got him cut up, trying to get those wide tires to fit. But this will need to come out. He actually comes out pretty easy. He's got a filler neck with a tube and a little 10mm bolt goes in right there, and then you just wiggle him loose, pop him out the end. And then there are 2 bolts, one at the front and one down here at the back at the bottom. You just unbolt that, set it on the tire. We'll do what you need to do in order to get back to this bolt is the interior fender bolt, and this one you actually get from the inside of the door. You got to open the door up and reach in to get that. 1, 2, 3 across the top, and one little bolt that goes down there through the front of the fender. It is a Phillips screw. And then also on the bumper you've got 1, 2, 3 mounting bolts, sometimes 4. But this one, again, $400 project car, so not too worried about that. I actually might play with that a little bit, see if I can't space this bumper out to the edge of the new wide body fender. And kamikaze headlight. Check him out. Anyways, here's the fender. We've got it all pulled off and cut up. As you can see, I went right through the line, and I got a little crazy there, just a little bit. This all still needs to be cleaned up. It's still pretty jagged. You want to make sure you get a good clean edge, and removing the fender is the best way to weld it up. I think on this one, I did end up hanging the fender in order to get it to sit right and weld up. But also on that bottom cut, as I mentioned, you don't want to take it all. See how I've left myself even just a little bit of metal? That will help when you go to weld in the piece that's going to go from here back over to here. And so we are just going to take him like so. Back this camera up so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so this is about where he was sitting, and we are literally just going to space him out like that. About 2 inches is what my wide body is going to be. That's obviously way more than 2 inches, but that's what we're looking at doing. So that pattern that I showed you guys earlier is kind of a little bit messy, but it will do the trick. I know it looks like he's almost perfectly straight, but there actually is quite a contour to that. And you can see my lines are not exactly straight. I'm going to try to clean some of that up as I'm cutting. And then also, the more of this you can kind of do beforehand, you can definitely cut just a straight piece of, you know, whatever width you want your wide body to be. But this will just exponentially help with the grinding and getting everything, the fender, to line back up and look somewhat decent, because this is just going to be kind of a first cut. And then once I get the fender laid up against it, I can see where I've got high spots, because this is actually going to rotate. See, this is the front, and I've marked the inside, and this will be the outside where the lower fender actually welds back onto. But when you go to slap that fender back up against this edge, you're going to need to grind down. Like if you have a high spot here or there, you're going to need to grind that flat so that it sits nice, flat, and beautiful, and doesn't kink or bend on you in a weird angle, because otherwise you'll end up looking like this one did, where I didn't quite get enough. And of course the camera makes it look like it's nice and beautiful, and I did take some 80 grit to it trying to clean it up, but you'll end up with stuff like this, where that one actually had a little bit too much out. And then there are a number of high spots, which, wow, that 80 grit actually did really good to clean that up. But the smoother and the cleaner you can get that weld, all comes down to all your prep work. The more prep work you do, the better the weld's going to look. And again, I welded these from the inside, so when I go to weld this, I'm going to set that on a piece of cardboard. Well, probably not cardboard, because that last time I did that it caught fire, you know, flammables. Good times. Mind your flammables. So we're going to grind him up, cut that pattern out, clean him up. Part 3, hopefully I'll have it all kind of spaced where it should be and tacked together for you guys. This one I tried to keep a little bit shorter for you so you can get the general gist of what you're looking at if you wanted to try and do this for yourself. Again, I am not a body guy. I am a mechanic. I do the mechanic stuff, not the bodywork stuff. But so far going pretty smooth, pretty clean, pretty easy, other than having to take a lunch break. I think I've been to this about an hour, maybe an hour and a half at this point. Cutting the fender off and then unbolting what was left of the fender that was still attached and pulling it off. Not long at all. It all comes down to your tools you have. I do have a plasma cutter. I'm not going to use it for this thin gauge metal, and I might be a fool for doing that, but we're just going to use a cutoff wheel with an angle grinder. Cut him out, clean him up, and then line him up, start tacking everything together, cleaning up where we need to, grinding down. Again, prep work is the key to success here, and I am not going to grind away the front paint. I'm going to let it burn off wherever it so chooses to do that. As you can see here, granted I've already been back over this with a grinder, but it will just burn back. It will create a little bit of an uneven edge when it comes to final paint work, but again, I'm not a body guy. We're just going to burn the paint off. You can see where it's actually burnt into the paint pretty good, where I had a fire or two. And when you do this, just be aware if you start welding too fast or even one or two decent tacks close enough together, it will ignite a little fireball. So be ready to put that out. Start smelling smoke. Take your welding helmet off, figure out where it's burning from. We are using, as far as weld wire, I know I mentioned last time we were using a Hobart on a lower setting. We want the lowest voltage setting possible. This is going to be the heat coming into it, and this is the amount of metal that's going to dump in per trigger pull, and depending on how fast or how long you're holding that trigger. So we want a little bit of a higher speed. I found anywhere from 35 to 45 seems to work best for doing this. The weld wire we are using is 0.030 ER76S. I think I've got some more right here on the shelf. Yep, right there, ER70S-6. That's what you want. Just mild steel. Make sure you clean it up. Clean up your weld as you go. Not hard to do. Just get yourself a wire brush. Clean up the welds once you're done, and while you're in the process. So when, I'll show you guys how to do this. So you run, 5 or 6 tacks, and obviously they would be on the inside. You run 5 or 6 tacks. Okay, and then now you're going to weld right next to that last tack after you've been over here welding. You want to take this brush and clean that up, because that ER76S does not have any kind of a flux to it. It's the gas that protects it, but as that gas burns and that weld puddle solidifies, which this all happens very quickly, but as that weld puddle solidifies, that weld gas pulls everything, all the contaminants, everything to the surface, and that needs to be scraped off or brushed off with a rubber brush. Rubber brush, wow. Wire brush, not a rubber one. Wire brush it off, clean it up, and then when you go to weld again, it won't take all that corrosion and all of that nastiness and push it down into the next weld that you put down, because otherwise you're going to start getting porosity. You're going to start getting holes in your weld. So as you tack across and do one patch or one pass of tacks going across your fender, come back and wire brush them so that you have a nice, clean, fresh, corrosion-free surface to put your tacks. And that will help so that when you do take a die grinder to do your finished grind up and clean up, as you can see where I've burnt through the metal in a couple of places here. But once you go to do that, it's going to limit the amount of this kind of porosity. Now, I'm not going to go back over this with a welder. This is more than structural at this point. Watch for part 3. Should be coming out soon. Kind of give you a better look at what we're looking at building here. If you haven't seen part 1, go check that out. But hoping to have part 3 up here soon.